You know, sometimes when I look at our old family tree, the one grandfather carved on that big piece of driftwood, with all the names and dates twisting up like ivy, I start thinking about the really old stories. Not just our family, but way, way back. Like before grandfathers, before even great-great-great-great-grandfathers, before anyone knew how to carve a stick, before houses, before fires even. I mean, way, way back. It makes my head spin a bit trying to imagine it. But grandfather says that's where the best stories are, hidden in the long-ago dust. And there's this one story, he says, about an ape. But not just any ape, mind you. This ape, he reckons, might have been the very start of us. The first little spark of something new in the enormous ancient dark. Imagine a world, so green it hurt your eyes to look at it, stretching out further than you could ever walk. Trees, taller than anything we see now, their branches tangled together so thick the sun barely dappled the forest floor. And outside the forest, immense grasslands, like a golden sea waving in the hot wind, with tall, sharp grasses that could hide anything, from a tiny field mouse to something with teeth as long as my arm. This wasn't a place for soft hands or gentle hearts. This was a place of endless hunger, endless hiding, and endless watching. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that shifted, every scent on the wind meant something. It meant life, or it meant death. And deep in the heart of that great green sea, there was Kale. Kale wasn't like the big, knuckle-walking apes you sometimes hear about, the ones who roar and beat their chests. No, Kale was smaller, leaner, with long, strong arms perfect for swinging through the canopy. But something else, too. Something in his back, a stiffness, a straightness that meant he didn't always need his hands to move. Sometimes he'd drop from a branch, land on the ground, and just walk on 2 feet, like us. Not all the time, mind you, but more than any other creature in his troop. It was a funny sight, grandfather says, this gangly ape creature swaying, upright, his eyes constantly scanning, his hands free to do other things. And those hands? That was another thing. Kale's fingers, though long and nimble, had a kind of cleverness to them. A way of gripping and turning that was just a bit different, a bit more purposeful than the other members of his clan. He wasn't the biggest, or the loudest, or the one who got all the best fruit. In fact, he was often a bit of an outcast, preferring to explore the edges of their territory alone, driven by a strange, quiet curiosity that the others just didn't seem to have. His days were a constant hunt for food, just like everyone else's. Ripe figs, sweet berries, juicy grubs dug from rotting logs, anything to fill the gnawing emptiness in his belly. But Kale's hunger wasn't just for food, it was for knowing, for seeing. He'd often sit for long stretches, hidden amongst the ferns, just watching the tiny ants march in their endless lines, carrying crumbs bigger than themselves. Watching the way a certain kind of beetle burrowed into the bark of a particular tree. Watching the shadows lengthen and twist as the sun began its slow descent. The other apes in his troop, led by a grumpy old male named Grohl, mostly cared about, who had the best spot for fruit, or who got to groom whom. Kale cared about that too, in his own way, because being part of the troop meant safety, meant sharing. But he also saw the world in a way they didn't. He saw connections, patterns. He saw things that didn't just exist, but did something. One blisteringly hot afternoon, the air thick and heavy like syrup, a tremor ran through the forest floor. It wasn't the rumble of distant thunder this time. It was closer. A deep, rhythmic pounding that made the very ground vibrate beneath Kale's bare feet. He was foraging for tubers near the edge of the dense forest, his keen nose twitching, digging with a sharp stick he'd found. The stick wasn't a tool, not really. It was just a stick. But Kale had noticed that some sticks were better than others for digging, and he'd kept this one longer than most, pushing it deeper into the stubborn earth, exposing the hidden roots, The pounding grew louder, a drumming that spoke of great size and immense power. Kyle froze, his head cocked, listening. The other apes in his troop usually scattered at such sounds, fleeing up the nearest trees. But Kale, for some reason he couldn't explain, found himself drawn to it. A strange mix of fear and an almost irresistible urge to know. He crept forward, low to the ground, parting the thick undergrowth with his strong hands, his breath held. In his chest. Through a gap in the foliage, he saw it. A massive beast, larger than any he had ever encountered, lumbering through the open savanna. It was a kind of ancient elephant, with tusks that curved like enormous white sabers and skin, like cracked gray earth. It was tearing at a tree, ripping off branches with a terrifying display of brute strength, its ears flapping like giant sails. The sheer size of it was mesmerizing, but what truly caught Kale's attention was what happened next. As the elephant ripped away a large branch, a shower of fruit, ripe and succulent, tumbled to the ground. The elephant, oblivious, moved on, its massive feet shaking the earth. Kale's stomach growled. His troop had been struggling to find good food for days. The usual patches of berries were sparse, and the best fruit trees were being guarded by stronger, more aggressive creatures. These fruits, fallen from the elephant's clumsy destruction, were a windfall. But there was a problem. A pack of scavenger dogs, lean and hungry, with eyes that gleamed with cunning, had already spotted the bounty. They darted in, snapping and snarling, their movements swift and silent. Kyle watched them, his heart pounding. He was smaller than them, not as fast on four legs, and certainly not as vicious. He would be easy prey if he tried to snatch a single fruit. He pulled back further into the shadows, observing. The dogs were fighting over the fruit, tearing at it with their teeth, growling over every scrap. He knew he couldn't fight them. His clan would never risk venturing out into the open to challenge such predators. They would wait for the dogs to leave, and then perhaps, if anything remained, they might try to claim it. But by then, there would be nothing. Kale's gaze flickered from the snarling dogs to the ground around him. He saw a pile of loose stones rounded by the elements, and then nearby a thick, gnarled branch, roughly the length of his arm. It was heavier than his digging stick. An idea half-formed and audacious sparked in his mind. He picked up the branch. It felt solid, weighty in his hand. He wasn't sure what he intended to do. The other apes used branches to knock down fruit, or sometimes in displays of anger to strike at each other. But this felt different. This was for something else. A flicker of memory. He had seen a frustrated gorilla once, swatting at a buzzing insect with a palm frond, a more effective blow than a bare hand. This was like that, but bigger, more dangerous. He gripped the branch tighter, testing its balance. The dogs were still squabbling, their attention focused entirely on the scattered fruit. Kale took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and distant, fear filling his nostrils. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to seek the safety of the trees, but the hunger, that deeper hunger for something beyond mere sustenance, pulled him forward, and the image of his troop, their bellies aching, their faces drawn with scarcity, pushed him too. With a sudden burst of courage, Kale burst from the undergrowth, letting out a surprisingly loud, guttural yell. It was not a roar, not a challenge, but something unexpected, a harsh, alien sound. The scavenger dogs, startled, looked up, their ears swiveling, their eyes narrowed. They saw a figure, standing taller than they expected, waving a heavy stick, making a strange, unsettling noise. Kyle, emboldened by their momentary hesitation, took another step forward, swinging the branch in a wide arc, smashing it against a fallen log with a resounding crack. The sound was loud, sharp, unnatural. The dogs, creatures of cunning and quick retreats, were not accustomed to this. They were used to a quick chase, a predictable fight. This was neither. This upright, stick-wielding creature was different, unpredictable. One of the larger dogs, its fur matted and scarred, snarled, showing its teeth. It lunged, a low, menacing growl rumbling in its chest. Cale didn't flee. Instead, with a burst of adrenaline that coursed through his veins, he swung the heavy branch, not at the dog directly, but at the ground, just beside its snapping jaws. The stick hit the hard earth with a sickening thud, kicking up a shower of dust and small stones. The dog yelped, startled by the near miss and the strange, loud impact. It faltered, uncertain. The other dogs, observing the odd confrontation, began to back away, whimpering. They were pack hunters, but their strength lay in numbers and predictable prey. This creature, with its strange posture and its noisy, flailing weapon, was too much of a risk. Slowly, hesitantly, they turned, melting back into the tall grass, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Kyle stood panting, the heavy stick still clutched in his hand, his heart hammering like a trapped bird against his ribs. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by his own ragged breaths and the distant chirping of unseen insects. He looked at the scattered fruit, untouched by the fleeing dogs. He had done it. He had scared them away, not with his size or his strength, but with something else. With a stick, with a sound, with an idea. Kyle didn't go straight back to the trees that night. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and something wild, something thrilling that made his fur prickle. He held the heavy branch not like a burden, but like an extension of his arm. It felt good, solid. He chewed on the last fig, its sweetness a faint memory on his tongue, but the feeling of triumph still hummed inside him. He had faced the snarling dogs, animals his troop avoided like a forest fire, and he had made them scatter. Not with brute strength, for they were stronger, not with speed, for they were faster, but with the unexpected, with a thing. The other, apes, when he finally made his way back to their sleeping tree, were already settled, huddled together for warmth and safety. Grohl, the grumpy old leader, grunted a low warning when he saw Kyle approaching. His eyes narrowed. Kyle ignored him, finding a less desirable spot on the outer edge of the troop, away from the prime sleeping branches. He still clutched the branch, even as he curled up, a silent, unmoving guardian beside him. He could feel the eyes of the other apes on him, curious, a little wary. They sensed the change in him, perhaps. That tiny shift in his posture, in the way he held himself. They just didn't understand it yet. The next morning, the troop began their usual foraging. The sun rose, a blazing orange ball burning off the last wisps of ground mist. The heat was already building, promising another sweltering day. Cale followed the troop, but his eyes weren't fixed solely on the berries or the grubs. They scanned the ground, looking for more sticks, for different kinds of stones. He experimented quietly when the others weren't watching. He tried hitting a tough nut with a small stone, but it only bounced. He tried twisting a vine, but it snapped. He was learning little by little, not by teaching, but by trying and failing and trying again. The famine that Lysander mentioned to King Valerius wasn't just in the human lands. It was in the wild, too. The dry season had stretched on longer than usual, shriveling the fruit on the trees, drying up the streams, forcing the animals to range further and further in search of sustenance. Cale's troop was suffering. Their bellies were often empty, their movements lethargic. Grohl, the leader, was growing increasingly irritable, his temper quick, his grunts of displeasure more frequent. The troop was restless, their anxiety a palpable thing in the humid air. They needed food, they needed water, and the usual places were yielding nothing. One afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, painting the grasslands in shimmering heat hazes, Cale found himself lagging behind the troop. They were moving towards a distant cluster of trees, hoping for a hidden waterhole, but Cale's senses were drawn elsewhere. A faint scent, carried on the almost imperceptible breeze, caught his attention. It was the rich, earthy smell of disturbed soil mingled with something else, something pungent, almost sweet. He remembered the tubers he had dug yesterday, the ones that had been so stubbornly rooted. This scent was stronger, deeper. He ventured away from the troop's path, moving cautiously through the whispering grass, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. His intuition, honed by countless hours of quiet observation, tugged him forward. He came to a patch of ground where the earth looked softer, darker, and there, peeking out from the dry, cracked soil, he saw the faint green tips of what looked like roots. He knelt, prodding the earth with his bare fingers, but the ground was hard. Too hard. He remembered his digging stick, the one he'd used yesterday. He hadn't brought it with him. Frustration bubbled within him. He was so close to something he could feel it. But his hands weren't enough. His gaze darted around. He needed something to dig with. His eyes settled on a cluster of small, sharp-edged stones, probably broken off a larger rock during a long-forgotten landslide. He picked one up. It fit snugly in his palm. It wasn't flat like his previous digging stick. It had a point, an edge. He rotated it in his hand, feeling its texture, its potential. Cautiously, he began to scratch at the hard earth with the stone. It was slow work. The stone was awkward, and his hand quickly grew tired. But it was working. Tiny clods of earth began to loosen, revealing more of the hidden root. He scraped and dug, his brow furrowed in concentration, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth. This was different from just pushing a stick. This was actively shaping the earth, breaking it, forcing it to yield its bounty. After what felt like a very long time, his persistence paid off. He unearthed a large, irregular root, thicker than his arm, with a rough brown skin. It smelled sweet, promising sustenance. He rubbed the dirt off it with his hand, then bit into it. The flesh was starchy but satisfying, filling his empty belly with something solid and nourishing. He pulled out another and another until he had a small pile of roots beside him. As he ate, a thought, clear and sharp as the stone he held, struck him. The stone. It had helped him get food the others couldn't reach. It wasn't just a thing. It was a tool, and not just any tool, but one that could do something specific, something his hands alone couldn't. He looked at the stone in his hand, then at the other roots, then at the vast, dry landscape. If he could find more of these roots, perhaps deeper in the ground, in places no other creature could easily reach, then he would never go hungry again. He could feed his troop. A sudden sharp cry split the air. It was a warning call, one he recognized from his troop, a sound of alarm, of imminent danger. Kyle's head snapped up. His instincts, usually so reliable, had been dulled by the focus of his digging. He had wandered too far. Through the tall grass, he saw them. A small group of Grohl's apes, including Grohl himself, moving with a desperate, hurried energy. Their faces were drawn, their eyes wide with fear. And then he saw what they were fleeing from. A massive cat, sleek and golden, its muscles rippling beneath its spotted fur, stalking through the grass with a terrifying grace. It was a leopard, lean and hungry, driven to hunt by the same scarcity that plagued Kale's troop. The leopard was stalking a smaller, weaker ape from Grohl's troop, a young female, slow and hesitant from hunger. She stumbled, and the leopard crouched, its tail twitching, ready to pounce. Grohl and the other males, too weakened to truly fight, too focused on their own survival, merely shrieked and began to climb the nearest trees, leaving the young female to her fate. Kale froze, his heart pounding. The roots lay scattered around him. The stone was still in his hand. He could climb a tree too. He could escape. But the image of the young female, so vulnerable, so clearly abandoned, burned in his mind. He remembered the gnawing hunger, the desperate search for food. He had food now, a whole pile of it, and he had something else. The stone. He stood up, clutching the stone. It felt small, insignificant against the power of the leopard. But an idea, bolder, more reckless than the last, flashed through his mind. He had used a stick to scare away dogs. Could he use a stone against a leopard? He didn't know how. He couldn't throw it far, and it wouldn't hurt the creature if he did. But perhaps it could make a noise. A different noise. He looked, down at the pile of roots he had dug up. They were heavy, too heavy to carry all at once. He needed a way to transport them. His eyes fell on a large, broad leaf from a nearby plant, big enough to wrap around several roots. He folded it, clumsy with his fingers, trying to make it hold. It was a small, almost unconscious act, but it was the beginning of planning for the future. The leopard tensed, its eyes fixed on the young female. Kyle let out another guttural cry, louder this time, a desperate, raw sound that ripped from his throat. The leopard paused, annoyed, its head swiveling towards him. It saw Kale standing upright, holding a stone, making that strange, unsettling noise. It was a distraction. Just a distraction. But it was enough. As the leopard turned its head, Kale did something truly unprecedented. He didn't throw the stone. Instead, he raised it above his head and with all his might brought it down hard on another larger stone beside him, one that had been heated by the sun. Crack! The sound was sharp, incredibly loud, a jarring noise that echoed across the quiet savanna. It wasn't a natural sound. It was the sound of stone meeting stone, purposefully, with force. The leopard flinched, its ears flattening, its predatory focus momentarily shattered. It had never heard such a sound before. It was alien, dangerous. The young female ape, startled by the sudden noise, scrambled higher into a nearby stunted tree, trembling but safe for the moment. The leopard, confused and irritated by this unexpected noisy interruption, let out a frustrated growl. It glared at Kale, its eyes burning with resentment, but the moment for its easy kill had passed. The upright, strange creature with its noisy stones was too much of an unknown. With a final, frustrated snarl, the leopard turned and melted back into the tall grass, disappearing silently as if it had never been there. Kale stood panting, the impact of the stone still vibrating through his arm. His heart was a frantic drum in his chest. He looked at the young female, huddled high in the tree, safe. Then he looked at the two stones, the one in his hand and the one he had struck. And then he saw it. Where the two stones had collided, a small, sharp shard had broken off. It glinted in the sunlight, a sliver of rock with a keen, razor-like edge. The night after the leopard incident felt different. The air was still cool. The sounds of the night animals still echoed. But for Kale, the world felt sharper, clearer. He curled up with the new, sharp stone tucked carefully under his arm, its keen edge a strange comfort. It wasn't just a thing he'd found. It was a thing he'd made, even if by accident. The thought of it, the way it had split from the larger stone, the way it had driven away the powerful cat, buzzed in his mind like a trapped bee. He knew with a deep, instinctual certainty that this small, sharp shard was important. The next morning, the troop was even more restless than usual. The sun, a searing eye in the sky, promised another day of endless heat and gnawing hunger. Grohl, the grumpy leader, barked orders, his patience frayed. The younger apes whined, their bellies aching. Kyle, however, felt a strange lightness, a secret knowledge that made the usual scramble for meager food less urgent. He still followed, still pretended to forage, but his mind was on his sharp stone. He waited for his chance. When the troop moved deeper into the forest, where the canopy was thick and the light dappled, Kale slipped away. He found a secluded spot, a small clearing hidden by towering ferns and ancient gnarled roots. He sat down, the sharp stone in his hand, and looked around. What could it do? His gaze fell upon a thick, fibrous vine, tough as leather, that snaked along the ground. The other apes would tug at it, pull it, sometimes even try to bite through it for the sweet sap inside, but it was almost impossible to break without immense effort. Kyle took the sharp stone. He pressed its edge against the vine, then pulled, a small, tentative movement. Nothing. He tried again, pressing harder, drawing the stone across the tough fiber. A tiny fraying appeared. A few strands snapped. His eyes widened. It worked. He kept at it, patiently, meticulously, his brow furrowed in concentration. He dragged the stone back and forth, until, with a faint snap, the vine parted. A clean, surprisingly straight cut. Kyle stared at the severed ends, then at the sharp stone, then back at the vine. He had cut it, not torn, not bitten, but cut. The implications bloomed in his mind like a flower in the damp forest floor. What else could be cut? His eyes darted to a fallen log, its bark tough and resistant. He tried the stone on the bark. It scraped, bit, and slowly, painstakingly, a thin line appeared. This was slower, harder, but still, it was cutting. He felt a thrill, a deep satisfaction, in this new power. Then, his stomach rumbled, reminding him of the persistent hunger. He thought of the roots, those hard-to-reach, fibrous tubers that were so abundant in the drier parts of the savanna. He remembered how difficult it was to break them open with his hands, or even with his blunt digging stick. He picked up one of the roots he had carried with him, a thick, tough one. He pressed the sharp stone against its skin, and with a careful, deliberate movement, he drew the edge. The stone bit into the rough skin, slicing through it with a satisfying tearing sound. He pulled the stone along, making a long cut, then another. He could peel the skin away, exposing the softer, more edible flesh within. It was easier. So much easier. And then, an even bolder thought. Could he split the root? He placed the sharp edge against the exposed flesh, pressed down and twisted. Slowly, the root began to cleave, separating into two smaller, manageable pieces. Kale ate the starchy, sweet root, tasting even better now, easier to chew, less work to prepare. This was mastery. This was power. He could get more food, faster, with less effort. This meant more time. More time for... what? He wasn't sure, but the feeling of having more time, more ease, was liberating. He spent the rest of the day in his secluded clearing, experimenting. He tried different stones, different angles. He learned that some stones were sharper than others, some broke in more useful ways. He learned that hitting a stone against another with just the right force could produce those keen, dangerous shards. He was becoming a craftsman, a creator of edges, though he had no words for such concepts. He just did. As the sun began its descent, casting long, shadowy fingers through the trees, Kale heard the distant calls of his troop, gathering for the night. He knew he had to go back, but he couldn't take all his discoveries with him. He picked out the sharpest, most useful-looking shards, tucking them into the folds of his fur carefully so as not to cut himself. He would hide the rest, marking the spot in his mind, a secret treasure trove of potential. He returned to the troop, his fur ruffled, his hands and mouth stained with root juice. Grohl grunted at him, a low, warning sound, but Kyle ignored him, finding his spot again on the edge. He noticed something, though. The troop was quieter tonight, their hunger still a heavy presence. Their foraging had yielded little. They huddled, together, a mixture of fear and exhaustion in their eyes. Kale watched them, then glanced at the small, rough bag of fibrous leaves he had made to carry the roots from the savanna yesterday. He had filled it with some of the sweeter, more easily digestible roots he'd peeled with his new sharp stone. He knew they were hungry. He knew he had something that could help. But how would they react? He slowly, cautiously, pulled out one of the peeled roots. Its sweet, earthy scent wafted through the air. A few heads turned, eyes, dark and curious, fixed on the strange, prepared food. Grohl's gaze settled on Kale, a question in his eyes. Kale held out the root. He didn't make a sound. He just offered it. The youngest ape in the troop, a tiny, whimpering female named Leah, whose belly was concave with hunger, hesitantly reached out a small hand. Her mother, a wary female named Mara, pulled her back, a low growl rumbling in her throat, distrustful of anything Kale did. Kale persisted, holding the root out towards Leah. He made a soft, rumbling sound in his throat, a sound of offering, not threat. Leah's eyes, wide and pleading, were fixed on the root. Her mother hesitated, looking from Kale to the root, then back to her starving child. The instinct to protect, to feed, warred with her ingrained suspicion of Kale's odd ways. Finally, Mara gave a small, reluctant nod. Leah snatched the root, stuffing it into her mouth with frantic urgency. Kale watched, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He had provided, he had shared, and he had used his new knowledge to do so. He pulled out another root, peeled and ready, and offered it to Mara. She took it, her eyes still wary, but a flicker of gratitude, or perhaps just desperate hunger, showed in their depths. As she ate, Kale noticed other eyes on him now. The older females, the younger males, all hungry, all watching. He continued to offer the roots, one by one, to those who approached tentatively. He didn't offer them to Grohl, knowing the old apes. Pride would prevent him from accepting, but he made sure everyone else had a small share. The small pile of roots diminished, but the warmth in Kale's chest grew. As the last root was consumed, and the troop settled down, their bellies a little less empty, their anxieties a little less sharp, Kale watched them. He saw the subtle shift in their demeanor, the slight easing of their tension. He had done something good. He had helped, and he had shown them something new, something that had the potential to change their very existence. But Grohl remained aloof, grunting in the shadows, his eyes dark with suspicion. He had watched Kale share the food, watched the troop accept it. He saw the subtle shift in their gaze towards Kale, a hint of respect, of reliance, and he didn't like it. His position as leader was built on strength, on dominance, on being the one who found the best food sources. Kale's strange new abilities, his quiet resourcefulness, threatened Grohl's established order. The old leader saw not generosity, but a challenge, not help, but a new kind of power rising, one he didn't understand, and therefore one he feared. Kale curled up again, the remaining sharp stones hidden in his fur. He was tired, but not with the bone-deep weariness of fruitless foraging. This was a different kind of tired, a tired born of effort and discovery. He closed his eyes, the buzzing questions in his mind giving way to the rhythmic breathing of the troop around him. He felt a connection to them now, deeper than before, a sense of belonging forged not just by shared blood, but by shared sustenance, by his own ingenuity. But as sleep began to claim him, a cold dread prickled at the back of his neck. He felt Grohl's eyes on him, even in the darkness. The old leader's resentment was a palpable thing, a low thrumming under the peaceful sounds of the sleeping troop. Kale had helped them, but he had also inadvertently challenged the very foundation of their society. He had introduced a new way, a different path. And the old ways, he instinctively knew, did not easily yield to the new. He had saved the young female from the leopard, fed his hungry troop, and discovered the secret of the sharp edge. But in doing so, he had drawn the silent, watchful ire of his own leader, and the night, though quiet, was suddenly fraught with a new, unseen tension. He felt a deep, unsettling premonition that his greatest challenges would not come from the hungry beasts of the savannah, but from within his own kind, from the fear and suspicion of those who clung to the old order.